Mech pilots, online. BattleTech manuals, online. Long-term memory, offline. All systems bungled. Initiating BungleTech podcast.
In our 31st episode of BungleTech, I'm back in the command seat and accompanied by the effervescent Michael as we go dark and dive as deep as we can into BattleTech Gothic. Quickly, run to the latrine and grab your emergency black eyeliner, lipstick, and nail polish. Now is the moment you've been waiting for. It's time to initiate our collective Goth makeover.
Bonus objective. Extraordinary proclamation. Initiating.
Honorable MechWarriors, before we spend time diving into how to be a cool goth at the BattleTech table, I just want to share a quick update regarding our global campaign initiative. We are currently sitting at over 60 tables registered with over 300 people across the world, and we've just released our 4th mission with 6 more missions still to go. Remember, you can jump on board whenever you fancy. The missions, audio briefings, and all the content are available in perpetuity. The only thing you miss out on if you start late, assuming you start from mission 1 that is influencing the overall arc of the campaign through your after-action reports. Get on board, MechWarriors. And to all those out there participating and submitting our after-action reports, we are reading them all and taking all your information into consideration from a holistic perspective. Honestly, it has been super fun to read all you've been sharing. There's lots of personality in there and cool things happening at the table. These reports are influencing the GMing approach we are taking in the campaign, so keep them coming. As always, you can get directed to all the global campaign content via a link in our show description. Now, on to the episode.
Conflict on Galatea continues to escalate as gang violence has intensified and skirmishes have broken out between mercenary units in the city and surrounding areas. Even in these violent times, however, there are tales of grit and heroism. Mercenary forces working for Black Sparrow Enterprises engaged in a desperate defense of the company's civilians, securing the evacuation of over 100 employees and their families. Grateful survivors have shared stories of noble MechWarriors breaking from formation to desperately protect company vehicles, or closing ranks and shielding the civilians with their own armor. And while Galatean mercenaries have a reputation for their egos and their brutality, many have proven themselves honorable and brave today, stopping to extract the crews of downed vehicles, or in one case carrying a transport out with their mech's hand actuator. These are tales of heroism in the sphere.
Tertiary objective. Stories of the Inner Sphere segment. Initiating.
It is an age of endless war. On the blackened worlds of dwindling stars, lumbering battle mechs, and horrific creations of rampant biotechnology tear at one another in a desperate struggle for survival and dominance. Where once the human sphere lived in a golden age under the banner of a glorious star league, today, only the unraveling empires of the 6 great realms remain to squabble over horror-scarred waste worlds. In the spaces between, marauders and privateers eke out a cutthroat existence of their own, relying on salvage and thievery to bolster their forces. It is a universe where right and wrong have lost all value, where victory belongs only to the strongest, and where the end of civilization is always just a heartbeat away. From the Litany of Time, Karpov Press, Terra 3015. Ever since humankind pulled itself out from the primordial sludge of prehistoric Terra, it has known little beyond savagery and war. From the earliest days of the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon to the rise of the tribes of Homo sapiens, who would one day found the first city-states, our existence has been one of conflict-driven evolution. To survive and thrive, we needed to be not just stronger and faster, but smarter and more inventive. More than any other apex predator, humanity honed its lethality in battle not only against nature and its myriad creations, but against its own kind. As we overcame the immediate impulses of instinct, we learned to think ahead of our next fights, our next conquests, and soon the creation of ever more effective tools for bloodshed became as natural to us as breathing. From the earliest spears to the latest in anti-mech lasers, we've become masters of weaponry. After millennia of creating fumbling civilizations that rose and fell in war after war over Terra's global resources, we unlocked the miracle of fusion power, only to immediately turn its potential toward a glorious new age of fighting for the stars and worlds beyond. For humanity, our history shall always be written in blood. Between the development of practical fusion technology and the subsequent discovery of effective faster-than-light travel, it was inevitable that humans would reach out to colonize the stars. Indeed, for many, leaving Terra couldn't happen fast enough. Be it for the sake of self-enrichment and power, or to escape the oppression of the Terran Alliance, the first world-spanning government in history, new worlds were sought out for exploration and settlement. The exodus that followed empowered the wealthy and the downtrodden alike. Thus began the Great Migrations. At first, the migrations represented the Alliance at its apex, an interstellar unity across the human sphere. But the Terran government would not long survive its own success. Grown corrupt and greedy, Terra enacted policies and taxes that quickly wore on the distant systems. When the inevitable rebellions began, Terra's might proved an illusion, embittered by what it saw as ungrateful insolence. The Alliance quickly turned its back on the colonies, abandoning even loyal systems whose very survival depended on Terran support. Thus ended humanity's first great empire of stars. As Terra turned inward and the Alliance collapsed, new governments emerged from the power vacuum, drawn together for trade and mutual defense against an unstable cosmos. The strongest and most resourceful colony systems, some as far as 400 light-years from Terra, forged the basis of new interstellar states, the seeds of empires yet to come. As these emerging powers grew, their clashing borders erupted with conflict. Thus began the Age of War. For centuries, continuous strife plagued humanity from the heart of Terra itself to the frontiers of its most distant progeny. It was in this crucible that the great realms of the Cameron, Davian, Kurita, Liao, Silaj, and Steiner dynasties were founded. Their territories, barely hemmed in between each other and the minor periphery states that encircled them, clashed again and again. Fleets of powerful warships delivered fighters and troops by the tens of thousands to worlds on every front, and many fell prey to nuclear and chemical weapons deployed on planetary scales. These were the years in which the technologies of warfare, driven by desperation and depravity, grew wild. In the Free Worlds League, where House Silaj held sway, the first abominations were born through the newly discovered genome splicing technology of grafting, producing great fighting monsters of flesh and metal. Not to be outdone, the Cameron-ruled Terran hegemony, successor to the Fallen Alliance, eventually countered with the development of the first battle mechs. As the wars raged on, countless worlds fell into darkness and chaos, blackened by ash and pounded into blood-soaked mud by giants of flesh and bone, or titans of metal and myomer. It was only when the horrors of planetary extinction came too close to their own homes that the Realm Lords turned increasingly toward their beasts and mechs as their civilized alternative to nuclear annihilation. Ironically, it would be the Lords of the Free Worlds League and Terran hegemony who led the human sphere out of the chaotic darkness. Thus dawned the Age of the Star League. The creation of the Star League heralded an age of great enlightenment that would last for nearly 2 centuries before betrayal from within shattered it. A grand experiment, Conceived by the war-weary leaders of the Free Worlds League and the Terran hegemony, the Star League eventually united all 6 great realms and the lesser periphery states beyond them beneath a single banner. For the first time in centuries, all of mankind was at peace. Thus began the Great Enlightenment. Backed by the power of Terra's royal bloodline, the Cameron dynasty, the elite Star League Knights and their peacekeeper armies maintained order throughout the human sphere. Conflict between noble houses were settled over the bargaining table rather than the battlefield. New technologies were developed, new worlds were discovered and brought to life, and fleets of mighty warships secured the interstellar trade routes. Weapons of mass destruction were outlawed. So too was the use of abominations as instruments of warfare. Grafting biotech was tightly restricted, permitted only for the purposes of human survival and biological research. Thus thrived humankind, and justice reigned. But no amount of justice can truly tame the passions of the human heart, nor can any miracle of science truly sate the human lust for ever greater wealth and power. Since time immemorial has a lesson been taught: no golden age may last forever. And so, it was within the paradise of the Star League that the seeds of avarice, pride, and wrath were sown. As the decades of prosperity wore on, the Realm Lords grew restless, unable to confront one another directly. They began to spar through proxies in the outlying realms of the periphery. But while the myopic lords focused on their more powerful neighbors, they ignored the rising fury of those worlds suffered most. In the industrialized systems of the Taurian Republic, they failed to notice the growing resistance to Star League taxation. Amid the luxurious vacation havens of the Canopian magistracy, they missed the sheer scale of criminal intrigue. The ominous silence among the hard-scrabble systems of the Outworlds fazed none among the Realm Lords, and not one of them paid any heed to the placid expanse that was the Rimworld's Confederacy, whose sheer size, industry, and influence nearly rivaled that of any great realm. Thus arose the usurper. By the 2700s, the growing recalcitrance of the Great Realms weighed heavily on the Cameron dynasty's efforts to maintain Star League stability. But while the lords of the Terran hegemony sought to head off the crisis through diplomatic means, tragedy struck with the death of First Lord Simon Cameron in 2751. Although no clear signs of sabotage were ever found, many believed the industrial accident which claimed his life was anything but accidental. In the meantime, the mantle of Star League leadership fell to Simon's 8-year-old heir, Richard II, and peacekeeper General Alexander Kerensky was appointed to serve as his protector and regent. Sensing weakness in their First Lord's youth, the other Realm Lords grew bolder. Their clandestine attacks against each other intensified, while their votes in the Star League Council increased economic hardship in the periphery. Worse still was the discovery of a terrifying new generation of abominations, unleashed on unsuspecting worlds across the sphere. For the creation of these new monsters, the Realm Lords blamed one another and proclaimed their right to respond in kind. It was on this stage of rising hostilities and flagrant disregard for the rule of law that First Lord Cameron found a new ally in Stefan Amaris, High Council of the Rimworld's Confederacy. Under Star League rule, the Rimworlds professed ironclad loyalty to the Terran hegemony and its Cameron dynasty. From the earliest days, their confederacy's ruling house of Amaris swore fealty to the Camerons with an earnestness that put the other Realm Lords to shame. Few, therefore, knew that beneath this veneer of patriotism seethed the burning hatred for Terra and the other great realms. In secret, the Amarises marshaled their forces and forged hidden alliances while raising whole armies of battle mechs, legions of monsters, and fleets of warships far beyond the boundaries of the human sphere. And now, as the young Richard Cameron grew into maturity, he did so under the increasing influence of his false friend, Stefan Amaris. By 2765, Nearly 2 centuries of pretense and placid tolerance was ready to end for every wrong, real and imagined, the arrogant realm lords had visited on the periphery states. Thus began the fall. It began with a periphery-wide uprising far more organized and effective than the Star League could ever have imagined. An open warfare swept around most of the human sphere like a ring of fire. With most of the great realms caught off guard, responsibility for restoring order fell to the Star League Knights and their peacekeepers. In their stead, loyalist forces from the still quiescent Rimworld's Confederacy moved into hegemony space to assist the Terran Home Guards. In 2766, amid the year-end holidays on Terra, Consul Amaris struck the final blow by assassinating the First Lord and seizing the Cameron throne for himself. Across the hegemony, Confederacy troops swiftly destroyed their Home Guard counterparts with lightning speed. Within days, the Cameron dynasty was massacred, and the Terran realm was firmly under the control of the self-proclaimed Emperor Stephan Amaris. Stunned, the other realm lords did little to oppose the usurper as he ordered Kerensky and his forces to stand down and swear allegiance to him. Instead, the Peacekeeper General turned his knights and armies against the Confederacy, smashing the traitor's home realm without mercy. As the Star League fell into civil war between Amaris and Kerensky, the Great Realms remained bystanders to the carnage, neither helping nor hindering either side. Horrors not seen since the Age of War were unleashed anew as the fighting raged on for nearly 15 years. By the time the conflict was over, hundreds of worlds across the human sphere lay in ruin, and an exhausted but victorious Kerensky stood over the smoldering corpses of the Amaris dynasty. Terra was freed, but its hegemony lay on its deathbed, held together only by the surviving knights and peacekeepers of the Star League. It was not to last. When the other realm lords gathered to decide the League's fate, they agreed only to strip the Peacekeeper General of his rank and position. Then each in turn proclaimed their own dynasty's right to assume the First Lordship. In the 4 years that followed, Kerensky desperately tried to convince the lords to unite once more in the name of peace, only to be rebuffed every time. Without exception, the realm lords chose their fateful course to ruin. Thus ended the Age of the Star League. Broken-hearted, Alexander Kerensky returned to the ravaged worlds of the Terran hegemony for what would be his last time. There, the defrocked Peacekeeper General summoned his most loyal knights and peacekeepers to Terra. Citing the certainty that a new age of war now loomed over the human sphere, he proposed a great exodus into the unknown, hoping to establish a new life far from the corruption and bloodlust of the disintegrating League. A third of the gathered warriors agreed to accompany Kerensky into self-imposed exile. In the year to come, Kerensky's followers coalesced into a grand fleet of vessels destined for the uncharted void. Thus retired the peacekeepers. But many knights refused to abandon their homelands, swearing instead to protect those who'd suffered the worst of the usurper's madness. They embraced the struggling remnants of the hegemony government and accepted the authority of its highest-ranking official, Prime Director Jerome Blake. As Kerensky and his followers fled the human sphere, Blake and his Minister of Communication, Konrad Toyama, reorganized the broken Terran hegemony into a new realm, the United Assembly of Stars, later to become the Unistar Ascendancy. Thus began the Great Reformation. Among the other realms, the fighting had already begun. Fleets of warships, armies of battle mechs, and waves of nuclear and chemical weapons bombarded the border worlds of nearly every great realm. Like the explosion of a supervolcano spewing fire, ash, and molten rock accumulated over centuries of rising pressure, the realm lords indulged the hate they'd struggled to suppress for nearly 20 generations, inciting an orgy of blood and death. Worlds were burned and blackened. Bombs obliterated factories and schools alike, and innocents died by the billions. Before long, abominations and grafting returned to the battlefield, sparking a horrendous new arms race in biowarfare with many unsuspecting planets falling prey to whole new breeds of specially crafted apex predators. Thus erupted the Endless War. Nearly 250 years have passed since the Star League fell, and the Endless War continues. The glory days of humanity's golden age now exist only in the ever fewer history texts that have survived the ongoing carnage. The periphery realms are extinct. Whole swaths of interstellar space have been lost to the various realms. Their populations killed off by disease, poison, starvation, and monsters of all forms and sizes. Knowledge and technology have been forgotten, erased on a scale few can even imagine. And still, the Realm Lords continue to make war over all that remains. Thus have we been damned. The monstrosities known as abominations are creatures or people specially modified for combat or other extreme labors. Seen almost universally as monstrous products of mad science and cybernetics, abominations possess an undeniable strength and resiliency. At the core of all abominations are the modified xenogenetic infusions commonly referred to as grafting, a twisted masterpiece of bioscience. Grafting employs a series of adaptive omnimorphic parasites, AOPs, to fuse traits and features from multiple life forms into a single organism, regardless of biological incompatibilities. Instead of scientists tailor editing the genes of a single creature in a lab to create a viable hybrid, the AOPs used in grafting shortcut the process, thanks to their abilities to absorb and replicate neighboring biostructures while retaining their own distinctiveness as they grow. The results work as a kind of cellular cement that facilitates a near seamless surgical bonding of biological features from other life forms, even if such forms come from radically different species or ecosystems. An otherwise land-dwelling mammalian host creature can thus be granted reptilian scales or living tree bark for an extra tough hide, while also receiving gills or an amphibian respiratory system for extended underwater operations. If the host creature is hardy enough to survive the process, and its grafting is successfully applied, another round of AOP infusions commonly stabilize the resulting hybrid down to its genetic level. To reinforce such creatures for hard labor or combat, mechanical prosthetics, myoma implants, and other cybernetics may then be required, and the beasts are trained to use their customized equipment. In this way, some of these monstrosities can attain sufficient size and mass to potentially match battle mechs under normal gravity. As the final product of this bioscience is an inherently unnatural and frequently horrific monstrosity, beasts that have undergone grafting are commonly called abominations. Although most abominations created over the past 6.5 centuries have focused on non-human hosts, humans have undergone grafting from time to time. In some cases, this is for medical emergencies, such as when repairing extensive organ damage in the absence of viable human donors. But in other cases, abominable humans, some hailing from their society's more undesirable elements, but many more volunteering on patriotic grounds, were developed for augmented labor or battlefield use. In the worst cases, such altered humans were the result of an AOP-laced biochemical attack, indiscriminately launched against a helpless population. Regardless of how they were created, abominable humans tended to become outcasts, even among their own compatriots. Because their final forms reincorporated all their grafting down to the genetic level, they were no longer seen as purely human anymore. These unfortunates are known as the Frayed. Grafting and abominations of all types have been controversial ever since they were first developed in 2352 by the infamous Free Worlds League xenobiologist Josiah Medlicin. But while several attempts were made to legislate the use and limits of such extreme biotech, none of these efforts coalesced into a sphere-wide ban until the Star League's peak in the mid-2600s. Even then, loopholes for medical and research purposes allowed the technology to persist in some sectors, albeit in a heavily restricted capacity. It thus came as no surprise when abominations returned to the battlefield en masse soon after the Star League's collapse. The larger monsters made for combat run anywhere from human-sized insectoids and semi-humanoid mammalians to hybridized megafauna big enough to square off against battle mechs. Abominations like these, built and enlarged as needed through extensive grafting, are among the deadliest creatures in the human sphere. They are also the most heavily augmented by implants and prosthetics, which provide the extra structural support and sensory aids necessary for effectiveness on the battlefield. And while many feature armaments fused to the very flesh and bones, harness-mounted weaponry provides larger abominations with even more firepower. Like most abominations, those made for battle use clever, tameable creatures as the host on which all of the grafting is fused. As such, even the most hulking and ponderous among them is at least as smart and responsive as a Terran dog or chimpanzee. After an abomination's final AOP infusion stabilizes physicality, lengthy training regimens teach the beast how to follow commands and interpret data through its implants while surviving and fighting on the modern battlefield. Typical regiments instill abominations with the ability to perform silent and graceful movements and the means to quickly recognize how and where to hit a moving battle mech, be it with steel-reinforced claws or any ranged weapons they're equipped with. Particularly smart creatures can even be trained to communicate directly with humans, be it through gestures and body language or whatever vocalizations they can manage. Combat abominations that pass muster after all the grafting and training are typically cloned in batches, or allowed to procreate directly with others of similar type. These methods not only produce scores of near-identical creatures without starting from square one, but also provide the beast's masters with the opportunities to observe, improve, and enhance them over subsequent generations. As a safety measure against potential berserker rampages or other dangerous acts of overt disobedience, all abominations, even those made for non-combat duties, are implanted with fail-safe devices that can be activated remotely by authorized personnel. While most fail-safes either incapacitate or inflict varied levels of pain, for training and warning purposes, deadlier controls are often used for many of the bigger, more dangerous, and less reliable monsters. The secured communications implants used mainly by the abomination's trainers and handlers to relay commands to them also ensure access to these fail-safe devices. And so, most handlers must remain relatively close to their charges so they can observe and react to changing conditions or abrupt signs of deviation in real time. This is especially true for abominations meant to work alongside battle mechs, and it is one of the main reasons most mechs are built with enough cockpit space to accommodate a monster handler passenger. An additional weakness, common to an overwhelming majority of all abominations, has also proven useful to their training and control: ultraviolet hypersensitivity. This flaw is a common, unavoidable side effect of the grafting process, intrinsic to the AOPs that bind each monstrous hybrid together. By the time most combat abominations hit the field, the rigors of training have already acclimated the creatures to the worst of this condition, but the sensitivity never goes away completely. This gives trainers and handlers a means to subtly guide their charges without resorting to the more extreme options. Unlike creature-based abominations, human-based monsters are far less beastly than their larger kin and are completely self-aware, which allows them to function without the constant presence of a handler. Their human-level intelligence and physicality generally enable them to operate weapons and machines just as well as any unmodified warrior, while possessing some superhuman advantages in extreme conditions. Nonetheless, their existence poses serious existential and ethical questions, with many considering their mere existence an affront to nature and gods alike, while others debate the best way to normalize them. To control their breeding in the past, many frayed were sterilized as part of their transformation. Even in the days when grafting was least restricted, the existential threat of non-human contamination mixing into the human gene pool was broadly recognized. It was one thing to breed and release scores of quasi-demonic monster hybrids against an enemy world, but few wanted to risk accidentally replacing humankind itself in the bargain. Despite these efforts, Many shattered and poisoned planets throughout the human sphere are now riddled, if not dominated, by whole populations of Frayed who've somehow managed to breed and survive. Moreover, centuries of debate over the rights and place of the Frayed alongside humankind have undermined even the most earnest attempts to keep Freys from procreating. The Star League era saw extra concerted efforts to forbid or sharply curtail the creation and reproduction of Frayed, for any reason. The laws and customs adopted during those centuries sought to head off the legal and moral questions certain to follow any emergence of a new sentient parahuman species. In most states, many of these policies remain in effect, but some realms, such as the Golden Unity and its Celestial Throne, have allowed these practices to fade away in favor of what they see as a more enlightened and inclusive mindset. And thus, the Frayed flourish. This has been an excerpt from the BattleTech Gothic primer from Catalyst Game Labs. If you want to check out more, you can find the primer for download on Catalyst's website linked in our show notes.
This is Professor Michael presenting The Sphere in Decline. The process of xenogenetic infusion, commonly known as grafting, is the basis of most modern biotechnology, and is essential for many medical interventions, human augmentations, biowarfare, and of course the construction of abominations. Xenogenetic infusion, as it exists today, is made possible by the discovery and isolation of the family of adaptive omnimorphic parasites, or AOPs, which can attach foreign tissues into living animal cellular complexes, fully integrating them into an existing organism. This enables the breeding and growth of tissues bearing the traits of one organism, which can be removed from the donor, fused with an AOP, and then attached to a receiving life form. By doing this, complex constructions using multiple tissue and organ types can be assembled, tailored with specific capabilities and potentially further enhanced using conventional cybernetic implantation. In most cases, the base will be chosen as a sub-sapient species with tameable disposition and an adaptive neocortex that will enable them to make use of the extreme biological alterations and cybernetic augmentations. Finally, direct, secure communication implants allow handlers to condition, train, and eventually operate the creatures, though nearly all abominations carry fail-safe devices to incapacitate or terminate them should they become dangerous. Human graft recipients are not generally fitted with such devices. Now you know about the Sphere in Decline.
Primary objective, podcast topic segment, initiating.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 31 of BungleTech, a BattleTech podcast. And I am excited for today, because it is a day where I'm being joined by the most beautiful creation in existence, which I now know stems from grafting, my co-host, Michael. Welcome, Michael.
I was bred in a lab to be the perfect co-host.
I'd believe it. You know, we're coming off of episode 30 in which you and Paul led it without me, and I gotta say, that was a really good episode. Are you done with me, Michael? Are you going to branch off? Is there going to be a BungleTech version 2.0, which would, I guess, just be BattleTech? It just improves? You just become the BattleTech podcast?
You'll live with me forever because in order to make me successful in my solo episode, I needed to graft part of you into me. So actually, even after you pass, me and my clones will forever carry on your genetic lineage.
Amazing.
The ultimate podcaster.
Well, now we understand the origin of the world BattleTech Gothic, because it all came from podcasting about the topic. That's how it originally evolved. So, listeners, you've already started with the stories of the Inner Sphere, and you're like, what the heck was that? That was a little bit weird. Well, that was from the BattleTech Gothic Universe Primer, and that is what we are here today to talk about. Because, you know what? This is the type of weird that BungleTech is all about, in my opinion, at least.
I don't know. That's a weird thing for you to say, Mr. Nathan, and you've never said anything weird that I disagreed with before. Is this really what BattleTech's known for?
BungleTech, not Did I say BattleTech?
I don't know. I thought you said BattleTech.
No, BungleTech weird. This is BungleTech weird, not No, this is definitely not BattleTech weird.
Is it BungleTech weird?
I think BungleTech is about the weird, things. Well, let's just say
anything weird.
Anything weird is
we
BungleTech.
Own all weird.
Yeah, we own
all
weird.
Right. Okay, fair enough.
We own weird. And this is
I'm
weird.
Sorry. I'm sorry for no butting you in the middle of your intro.
No, that's okay. Let's no butt the entire way through our conversation of BattleTech Gothic. So what?
I don't think that's really a good way to run a podcast, Nathan.
Well, keep on going. Let's just.
No, I think we should stop here, actually. Let's restart.
Oh, what have I done? What have I done? It was a horrible suggestion. BattleTech Gothic is tearing us apart. Am I glad I came back? Well, Michael, it was a peaceful month. And honestly, it was really fun to listen to the podcast, an episode of my podcast that I wasn't on. It was like so interesting. Yeah, I had a ton of fun listening to it. So I'm happy to be back, but it was a pleasure to get that sweet little surprise. And obviously I enjoy getting dug into, and that episode had a lot of me getting dug into. So it was a joy. It was a joy.
And now you're back to get it in person.
I guess so. I need that monthly kick in the balls. Yeah, so if BungleTech is my monthly kick in the balls, well, BattleTech Gothic seemed to be a kick in the balls for some of the BattleTech community. It was quite the surprise. And what is it? As we're slowly getting to. Well, it is basically an alternative universe as part of a sort of continuum series that Catalyst is releasing. And it is very much BattleTech meets Doom meets Warhammer, I think is the cool way to think of it. Like, do this weird cross. It's interesting. When I initially saw it, I didn't actually instinctively think of Warhammer. I thought of Doom, and I'm like, my favorite video game of all time, for the record, is Doom 2. So I'm a big Doom guy.
Whereas I looked at it and I saw Warhammer, maybe just because of the name, because I played BattleTech Gothic way back when, but also, sort of the styling has some space Gothic Warhammer-iness going about it. And I didn't think about Doom, but after you mentioned it and looking at some of the art, yeah, I can see it.
Well, it's funny, Catalyst did a stream, and when they were doing the stream, I asked Randall at the time, I'm like, what was more inspiration, Doom or Warhammer? And he basically said both. So there definitely is inspiration from both of them, and I think it's pretty clear that you can see it. There's that inspiration. I haven't played Warhammer. I've seen it at the table, and I'm a little bit disconnected from the universe. I've played some games with Warhammer and stuff like that, but it's definitely not something I'm very steeped in. So I can understand that people that are more steeped in it, though, definitely see this as like, oh yeah, this is BattleTech and Warhammer had a baby, and it came out friggin' Goth, baby.
And we don't really know exactly how much there's going to be right now. When as of we're recording this, we know there's going to be a box set with a bunch of a few minis and a bunch of little biddies and stuff. There's a universe primer, but we don't have full rule book yet. We don't have details about a lot of things. We just have that rules primer so far, right?
Exactly. Just the universe primer. And,
universe primer. Yeah, sorry.
And they've shared, they've been very clear that this is something that they want to do that is not going to impact the main line. This is just sort of a little side adventure. And then obviously they have 2 more Continuum products planned for, one of which I'm super stoked for, which is the retro sci-fi themed one. That's not what it's called, but it's retro sci-fi. They're doing Gothic is the first, and they have a planned retro sci-fi, and they've a planned anime style. And I think that, it's interesting because BattleTech Gothic, to me, BattleTech sort of connects to this Gothic portrayal in the type of game it is, and perhaps, how this gaming industry is, like with Warhammer being such a big player. But, the retro sci-fi, to me, that connects to the original BattleTech, because the original art, the mechs just all looked War of the Worlds style to me. And that sort of retro sci-fi vibe is really capturing it. And then, you have the anime style. And if you look at, BattleTech anime depictions, the stuff that they had released in Japan, some of the art, like if you look at, I've referenced this before, but the Jenner 2C anime art, there's some really slick anime-inspired BattleTech art. So in my perspective, the retro sci-fi and the anime style are really not a stretch. They're a homage. Is that how you pronounce the word? Homage? Yeah. Homage. They're a homage. Homage. They're a homage. No, they're a homage to sort of the legacy BattleTech stuff. Whereas Gothic, to me at least, there are some stuff in the BattleTech universe that really tie into this. Like the Black Marauder and Onikuma. These are, cosmic horror sort of monstrosity stories that actually exist in the BattleTech lore and universe already. So there is some really weird stuff in the BattleTech universe, not to mention the Canopus Cat Girls or whatever. That's just grafting, man. This is covered. That's just grafting. So there's like a few things that sort of do connect to it, but still at the same time, BattleTech Gothic does seem definitely to me as more of a stretch than the retro sci-fi and anime style would for my instincts. But that being said, I'm down to clown, baby.
Yeah. I think the whole the idea of the BattleTech continuum seems sort of cool. I'm not super up to date on what all they've said about it and stuff, but it seemed like a sort of neat idea. On the one hand, you can just roll out some unique minis with some different styling, for people who like the artwork or like the setting. And at the same time, you can, sort of explore these weird little settings to try and pull new people in. The setting is obviously like such an important part of BattleTech. We talk all the time about like how so many people get drawn in and stuck into the BattleTech world for, decades because people find the setting really compelling. What about people who don't find the setting that compelling? This can be a fun way for other people to look at it and hop into it. Or maybe it just, provides something interesting for, some like what if stuff for, fans to get into and broaden the horizon a little bit.
And I will say one thing that this actually does play on, which sort of just clicked into my head, is this really pushes, MechWarriors are the knights of the inner sphere. That sort of dialogue, and in many ways, that sort of old school BattleTech, like too. Like at the same time, we had the War of the Worlds style minis, that sort of, MechWarriors are knights. Like now they're really knights. They're slaying dragons, man, and demons. Like they are like Templar knights. Like the primer says, no, they're still just officers. But I mean, like if you're going out and slaying giant demons, like that definitely has some knight elements too, for sure. So it does lean into that a bit.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because it's not even, they are these obviously alternate worlds and stuff. We only really know about the BattleTech Gothic so far, but I find it interesting that I think they've actually done a really good job like balancing making it weird and different, but still like really rhyming with the existing setting. So yeah, it's kind of just amped up that, knights fighting things, but it's not just fighting people, it's also fighting monsters. But it's still surprisingly grounded, there's like a horror theming in the Gothic stuff, but it's not supernatural at all. It's just a different world that has that, horror of war amped up, knights, maybe not even heroic knights, but terrifying knights on the battlefield. That's all like amped up to 11.
Totally. And there's, at the same time, there's also like stuff here connected to like the vibe and the aesthetic of the different mechs, like the decorative nature, the designs. It does in many ways feel like, oh, this is something that could fit in Solaris as well. Like obviously the grafted monsters and abominations, no, but the aesthetics of those mechs, like this is the type of funky thing you could have in Solaris. So it's actually cool that we're going to be getting these minis that have these designs, because even if you're not into, you're not into the Gothic scene. And for the record, I was a goth when I was younger, so I'm totally ready for this. I got my eyeliner and my black nail polish ready to put on as soon as this launches. I'm just going to go back into another goth arc in my life. But even if you don't like that or want to do that, you can still take these mechs to Solaris. And I think there's some cool stuff there. And honestly, I also do think that there has been an interest for kaiju sort of encounters, for next to fight giant monsters or giant animals on different planets. There's always been that interest, I think, for more casual players to just, drop down to a fun little game. Maybe not sit an entire campaign in it, but I think this will scratch that itch in many ways. And for me, anything that sort of leans into cosmic horror, because I'm a huge fan of cosmic horror, H.P. Lovecraft style, anything that sort of creeps in that way. Like that's why I love the Black Marauder. That's why I love Onikuma. Love cosmic horror stuff. This sort of, is treading that line a little bit, and I feel like could slip in. Like you could imagine the Black Marauder being something grafted, in which it was grafted and they tried to combine it with a battle mech, like some weird sort of hybrid combine that created this thing. Onikuma, 100%. You can imagine the Onikuma being a grafted beast in this universe that's fully armored. So there are sort of like those hooks that connect to the Prime lore that I think that you could take elements from this and put them in the standard BattleTech game, and it would still be like, it'd be different, but I think it would be fun and cool.
Yeah. So, maybe we can touch on this. I'm not sure this is like either of our specialties here, but we have at least read the primer and we do know a little bit about the lore. But like, for people who haven't read the primer yet, or maybe to get you interested in the primer, how much has this diverged from the the BattleTech lore and love? Like when you look at the cover of the book, it's like totally wild. It looks like you're looking at totally different property, but how much does it actually change in your opinion?
Well, first, if I looked at the book and it didn't have the word BattleTech at the top, I would think this is an extreme BattleTech ripoff. First, assume that this wasn't. Like, I would this is some weird, like, bootleg thing. That's what I'd honestly think. And what's funny is when the trailer came out, I watched it, and I truly thought it was an April Fool's joke.
I also thought that when you said it to me. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting April Fool's joke.
Yeah, I think it was a common sentiment. And I was like looking, and I'm like, man, they went really into this April Fool's joke. This is intense. This is like, whoa, man. And then I talked to someone, and they're like, no, it's real. I've seen it. And I'm like, whoa, cool. Okay, I can get down with that. I can get down, but it definitely was a big surprise to me. But like, if you look at the timelines, everything parallels. Like you have the Star League timeline, then rather than the Succession War period, we have the Endless War period. And this is basically, it's sort of funny about this. I was thinking about this, is that, the BattleTech Gothic is set into the Succession Wars. It just ends at the Succession Wars. That's where it's setting right now, right? And so for all those players that are really old school, they're like, oh, it was good to the Succession Wars, and then it got messed up once the clans came in. Well, they got an expansion just for you. BattleTech Gothic. This is for you guys. Isn't this what you wanted? Isn't this what you wanted? They're like, no.
There's something interesting about the timeline and the way they did it, where I think I said sort of like rhyming. It's got all the same like core beats, so you sort of instinctively as a BattleTech person, you know about the order that things happened in, but then a lot of details are changed, and we ended up with hideous biotech monsters. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of like an old like 80s 90s role playing game, or where someone had like a crazy idea about like how I don't know, it's the Cold War but superheroes showed up and now the world's all different. It's like the little like small things changed, and now all of a sudden the world's full of monsters instead of mechs, and also mechs. It's full of both.
Totally. And one thing that I found to me was intriguing is, like, let's say we take Tex's perspective on this, which is the historian perspective, which, history is written by the winners, all that stuff. You got to look at things from, like, understanding this was written from a certain perspective. You could imagine that this was pretty much exactly the same as the BattleTech universe until grafting came in. And then after grafting, it was still pretty similar until the Succession Wars. And then the technology started becoming worse. Things started getting stripped. Education started getting worse. The world started looking at things differently. It's almost like you're returning during the Endless War to this medieval period, which is sort of what the Succession Wars were, right? Like technology was taking a huge step back. And so how people were actually writing and referencing things, like they refer to Kerensky's knights and peacekeepers. Like they use the term knights so much more than in traditional BattleTech stuff. Like, there's the Knights of the Inner Sphere and stuff like that. But that was sort of an outlier. Now it's like, no, they were knights. Like, this is really, the perspective is almost like it's been written by the person who's writing history in Comstar, like this technologically inclined sort of monk, but rather like this Abrahamic Gothic monk. You know what I mean? Like they're viewing the world through that perspective. So from like how the story is told, like maybe the universe is much more similar until grafting, then it could be the exact same. And it could, maybe it's not even that different, but like the culture has changed so much because of grafting, and this concept of like, literally these are demons on the field, that it has changed how history is actually being documented and communicated.
Yeah, and that's maybe one of the things that like we'll maybe get into this a little bit when we talk about like how playing a game in this would probably be different, but the setting, I think the setting sort of biases towards a particular type of story a lot more. And I think that just necessarily it's not going to be as deep as the canon universe, but it's got enough, like sort of like you're saying, there's like these big sort of ideas. It's a little bit like high concept that you can really get a grip on it pretty easily, and so it's going to be a world of eternal war. Everyone hates each other more so than usual. There's not a lot of that like complicated politicking stuff that's really, really common in the canon universe. It's a bit more straightforward.
Yeah, I think it feels, at least how this is written, and like how it presents itself too. It's more black and white. Like BattleTech is very gray, but this, because of the imagery alone, like it's very dark inherently. So I think it makes it feel a lot more black and white in nature. But
and all the like different individual factions have been written that way. There's sort of they list like 6 or 7 like major factions. You've got your 5 main successor states, and they are all, their history is written to include the states that we're used to, the families that we're used to, and then it's sort of the rest of the lore is explaining how they like got progressively more messed up. Their, particular beliefs led them into being, an absolute nightmare to live in. And now they hate everyone who isn't in their section of space. Everyone's become extremely xenophobic and, willing to commit terrible atrocities, even more so than the regular, Prime universe. So it's, everyone, it's got that like basis that you can sort of grasp onto, like, oh yeah, I wonder what happened to the Free Worlds League. And then you read it and it's like, oh yeah, the Free Worlds League got super messed up. They really liked grafting and murdering people.
Yeah, and inventing grafting, as a matter of fact, yeah. And I think that like the Free World League, for example, now called the Realm of the Endless Dynasty, still so many parallels. So like basically, as far as when I was picking up, the leadership's changed. The big players have changed. So, but they were still there originally. But anyhow, the players have changed. What I found interesting is in the Free Worlds League, they always had like lots of, I forget what the term of it would be in the traditional BattleTech universe, but they essentially modified people with technology. And they had a huge stigma against, even though they were doing it a lot, there's still a huge stigma against these people. And it's actually the same thing in the realm of the Endless Dynasty with grafting. It's common there, but there's the parallel of the stigma against it, and they even invented it. So there's like all these very distinct parallels that are very easy to pick up. And like, I mean, even the religions, like the dominant religions of the different people, like, in Realm of the Endless Dynasty, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Hamitism. So it's like the main religions that are being promoted and discussed are still connected to, the reality of where BattleTech started in terms of, Earth, and it just has evolved from there. So yeah, definitely so many parallels, just different, as you say, angles. And man, this art's crazy. Like I'll share a link to the primer in the episode. It's publicly available now.
Even if this doesn't really speak to you, you're not sure that you'd ever like really be interested in running, and it's kind of worth checking out the art, just as a cool thing. It's sort of fun to see.
Yeah, I recommend page, I think 59 or 50, 58. It's a picture of a phoenix hawk standing above grafted monstrosity. It's ripped its arm off. So first, this level of graphicness is like, whoa, BattleTech, we've ripped mech's arms off before, but now this is actually a living creature. It's like a fire starter in the background, and the fire starter looks slick, to be honest, how they've redesigned it. And then there's
slick with blood.
And slick in many ways. And then there's a cutie little urban mech, and the urban mech redesign actually looks pretty
the
pretty cute.
murder urban mech is kind of wild.
I think that the choices of mechs are, I mean, I guess I wouldn't comment on many of them, like that they're releasing. I have a disdain for Atlases, and the Atlas is like the leader. But you know what? Actually, in a world like this, the reason I hate the Atlas is because I think it's stupid to have a mech that has a skull face. Like, who's this going to intimidate? But you know what? In a world called BattleTech Gothic, when you're fighting gigantic, like, grafted monstrosity and demons, I can see the validity of having a giant humanoid mech.
Having a murder face mech.
I
do like face. Towards the back of the book where they have each of the different successor states, and they have a picture of an atlas for that successor state. And I find it very funny for some reason.
Okay, which one is let's evaluate these, right? So let's follow around. Okay, let's do a tier list. Which one's the worst of them all?
I think it's got to be the Realm of the Endless Dynasty, personally. It's got a weird, dumb cone hat.
You don't like the monk hat?
And it looks very silly. It is extremely goofy. Go and check out the second to last page in the primer. That Atlas is getting made fun of. He's got dunce cap on.
I was gonna make fun of the Realm of the Blazing Light, but now that I realize it's sort of doing a sun thing to go with their sun logo, I actually think that's pretty rad. And
yeah,
Realm of the Celestial Throne, probably that's my least favorite. It's a traditional sort of Chinese military, like medieval military hat, that sort of style thing. I think it just looks a little bit too much like a standard trooper rather than like a general. Same with the Realm of Blood and Steel. It just looks like, I don't know, pretty standard for me. But I think that like the top tier for me are definitely Realm of the Blood Dragon, Realm of the Blazing Knight. And I actually,
You like
I do
the
like
Oni with the Oni horns.
Hey man,
It-
only a demon can fight a demon.
Speaking of diverging from the standard lore, Kurita is still the bad guys.
I sort of feel like the Free Worlds League is also pretty bad. I mean, when I was reading the Free Worlds League perspective, like they were slammed a little bit because they were the ones that really were about this whole grafting concept, and they're the ones that really brought it to the forefront, and the ones that were really using these weapons. I think they used them against the realm of the Celestial Throne for a big battle to turn stuff around and basically like did some monstrous acts.
Yeah, I mean everybody's pretty evil. That's sort of the thing. It's like, more so, we always say in the BattleTech universe that like no one's good. Everyone does immoral things sometimes, but that's like amped up in this where like everyone has become insane xenophobic zealots. So but yeah, it was Kurita that did the super terrible things to the Davians and turned the Davians into crazy, hyper zealous crusaders.
Interesting.
The Free Worlds League also probably did mega terrible things to someone else as well, I assume. But yeah, Kurita is like once again like willing to do anything at any cost. I don't know. I read their thing and I'm like, damn, Kurita's getting Kurita slander once again.
So let's which is also, if that's the case, that also reflects the original BattleTech well. The universe has evolved to be very gray. But at the beginning when it was released, there was more good guys and more bad guys. Just because I think of the nature of writing in that time and sort of, we weren't as aware as we are now regarding the variety of diversity and experience in the world, perhaps.
I actually find in this one the Capellans really compelling, because I just sort of find how they've been set up here very interesting. And I think it has, a lot of things that are sort of in common. But I don't know, I find it more interesting where not only have they sort of been struggling to survive when surrounded by a bunch of more powerful states, and they've had to fend off attacks, and they've had to make sacrifices, and now they've got a culture built around making sacrifices for the good of their nation. But they have also accepted that grafted humans, which are called the Frayed in the universe, are actually okay. You can still be a like valuable contributing citizen, even if you have like, I don't know, a lizard face. You're still a human, which is pretty uncommon among the successor states. There's a lot of like, once you get all bioteched up, you're not really human anymore, and everyone hates you. Unless you're Capellan, in which case they're actually maybe kind of cool with it because they had some leaders who were grafted now and then.
So if you had to choose via name alone, which faction's your favorite? So you have Realm of the Blood Dragon, Draconis Combine, Realm of the Blazing Light, Lyrans, Realm of the Celestial Throne, Capellans, Realm of the Endless Dynasty, Free Worlds League, and Realm of Blood and Steel, Steiners.
Well, and they also have their like actual national names, right? The Ironclad Alliance, the Collective of the Violet Crux, the Golden Unity, the Draconic Imperium, and the Shining Kingdoms of Avalon. So there's a lot of names kicking around here.
Okay, so let's say we take the full. So let's go it again. So Realm of the Blood Dragon, Draconic Imperium. Realm of the Blazing Light, Shining Kingdoms of Avalon. Realm of the Celestial Throne, Golden Unity. Realm of the Endless Dynasty, Collective of the Violet Crux. Realm of Blood and Steel, Ironclad Alliance. Of those five, if you had to choose your faction based on the name alone, which one do you choose?
I don't know. I think I'd probably, just name alone, I'd probably have to go Ironclad Alliance. I think that sort of just fits the style I like the best.
Oh, wow.
Knowing something about like how they're written, probably not. But, just going name alone, I'd have to go with Ironclad Alliance, I think. How about you?
Oh, man.
You had to know this question was coming. I thought you were asking because you had an idea.
I think that I would say I really like the Capellans and the Free Worlds League. So either the Realm of the Celestial Throne, Golden Unity. No, I think I'd choose Realm of the Endless Dynasty, Collective of the Violet Crux. I just like that. Like, because I feel like any of them else, if I chose that faction, I feel a little bit too locked in. Like Realm of the Blazing Light, Shining Kingdoms of Avalon. Choosing that one, you're like, okay, I'm a paladin. We're all paladins. Realm of the Celestial Throne, Golden Unity. You're like, interesting. Okay, we're going to be collectivists. I'm getting this vibe here. Then you have, Realm of the Endless Dynasty. Oh, that sort of... I don't know. I don't know how I'm justifying it, but it just feels like that is the vibe that I'm going with the most. Realm of Blood and Steel Ironclad Alliance does have a simplicity to it, though, which is nice.
So I think this sort of gets into a little bit. You're starting to edge on like what it's going to be like to play this. You mentioned like feeling a little bit like penned in if you like a particular faction, and I think that's maybe one limitation of this style of sort of this style of universe, this like amped up endless war. Everyone hates each other and everyone is like xenophobic to the max. I do think it's going to be a little bit narrower to try and play it. Like there's not going to be quite as many options for like, a ragtag team of, a Capellan, a Davian supporter and a Steiner lover walk into a bar.
Yeah, they're going to meet in a very different circumstance. And actually, you know what? There's, funnily enough, I want to mention there's 3 more factions we didn't talk about because they're not handled the back, which is the Terre Noir Unistar Ascendancy, which is Comstar.
The Comstar knockoffs.
Then the Marauder States, the Periphery. And then there is Privateers, which are, I think, pirates and mercenaries, perhaps. Combination of the both. So everyone's represented in some way, but the only ones that get, the pretty mechs and the aligned mechs that are branded are the 5.
Yeah. If I recall correctly, the Marauder states are a little bit more messed up than in regular BattleTech. Like the Periphery got like mega owned in some of the wars. I think the Taurian Concordat got like annihilated. There was a lot of words here. I read a lot of words, but I'm pretty sure they're much less impactful than they are compared to the regular.
Well, it starts with this line. This is their first 2 sentences. Their names and numbers are legion. Their threat to civilization is palpable. They are rebels, pirates, and mutants, corruption incarnate in a deteriorating universe.
Gotcha. So they're sort of like, they're much less like nations. They're much less like individual factions and more just, the teeming horde at the edge of civilization. There's not like, there's warlords. There aren't nation states. They're not here to trade and vie for success. They are swarms of genetically altered super soldiers, driven to the edge who want nothing more than to tear down the remains of the sphere.
That's what it would allude to. And then the question becomes like, once again, back to the text perspective. But who's writing this? Who's the historian that's writing this? Is this Comstar? Because, again, that's something that Comstar always wanted to, at this time period, they wanted the inner sphere to really, the main states to feel this way about the Periphery, right? Because they were really trying to control, they were reaching out further than anyone knew. So if this is written from the perspective of Comstar, which would make sense, the posturing that is presented here would align with their agenda.
Well, and it's also explained that, like, basically the sphere has turned inwards. These different successor states are focused on themselves, on fighting each other. It's the succession wars cranked up, and the Periphery has just been forgotten. They have been left to die essentially, and there is no trade, there is no communication. they don't even get drawn on the maps anymore. But, they're out there, they're at the edge, there's horror stories told about the marauding states.
Back to your question, what you said about, how will this change the feeling of really playing the game? I feel like if you're playing, a campaign like this, there's going to be a lot more feeling of risk. Because, if you eject in BattleTech, you feel like you're going to be taken a prisoner. Likely, and that being a prisoner might suck. It will suck. But in this, you feel like
being a prisoner might suck a bit.
You're going to be ripped apart by these monstrosities. So I think, the concept of forced withdrawal, is that going to be even a concept that exists in this universe? It's like, no, you're going to fight to the death. You're a knight fighting demons. And do you think these like grafted creatures are going to do forced withdrawal? No way, man. Like, this is like, there are some things that would make sense. Like, I would be surprised actually if in this, when we get the rules for this, if actually forced withdrawal is mentioned, because it doesn't feel like it vibes. It vibes. Because once again, forced withdrawal, it makes sense when you're trying to, control and manage your resources, but that is war with some sort of specific rules. And it's not, monstrosities in the battlefield ripping each other's arms off and like tearing through people. It's a different level of horror and a different level of risk.
Yeah, I think that if you're going to be running a game in this, you're right. I think that like amping up that horror is going to be important. You're going to want all of those horror trappings and not just horror trappings, but like the sort of, modern Gothic storytelling trappings where like, anyone could just die. You'll die terribly. It'll be an awful, ignoble death. And it'll be bloody and gory and horrific and all that sort of stuff. You wanna play into that. If you're playing BattleTech Gothic, you're gonna want to be playing into that.
I think so. And what's the, like, on the topic of new rules or rule changes that might come into effect, one thing that I would feel like would make a lot of sense would be something about, because BattleTech already has morale in battle, right? And like the morale to continue fighting on and all that stuff. But that's an advanced rule. It's optional. People don't play with it. To me, morale in this setting really makes a lot of sense. And also, like, even stuff like sanity, like fear, like morale is just, this high level thing, but like, fear, like the psychology of pilots, you know what I mean? You have your piloting, your gunnery, and what if you have your mind as well? You can break. Who knows? I don't know what they're going to do, but like, I feel like you really want to focus into the dread, because it's frankly, it's terrifying. It's graphic. It's disgusting. It is a place you don't want to be. You want friggin' the Doom Marine beside you at every single moment, saving you from these monstrosities.
Yeah, and you see that in the monstrosities as well. Sort of a common thing that a lot of games and settings will do with their like bioengineered monsters is like a tendency for them to break and go berserk on the battlefield. And we don't have the rules yet, but we have some mention of that in the primer here about, like almost every abomination has this sensitivity that can lead to ultra violence. So I bet that we'll see something like that for abominations as well. Some chance, every time they take damage, there's a chance that they're going to, break free and attack the nearest target.
Yeah, like a handler check or something like that. Yeah, that's actually really cool. I didn't think about that, but totally, you're right. Yeah, man.
And so that's what you want to have. You want to have your beloved war beast that suddenly gets hit, and you grimly have to put it down with a gauze slug before it tears open any more of your infantry.
PBIs, right? Poor Bloody Infantry is the abbreviation in the BattleTech universe. Now there are PBIs, really Poor Bloody Infantry. You wouldn't want to be infantry in BattleTech? Oh, trust me, you really don't want to be infantry in this universe.
Yeah. Looking a little bit, we've again, we haven't seen any rules yet, but just peering at the like spoiler for the box and like peeking around at like what it looks like. I'm getting the impression that the abominations, the bio monsters, are going to be somewhere in between like vehicles and infantry. They're obviously like beefier and heavier than infantry are, but I think they're going to like move and operate like infantry, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because they have, from what we've seen on the box, both or maybe not the box, but what we've seen of like the material, they have both BSP cards for the abominations or the grafted monsters, and they have it looks like the traditional sort of infantry cards as well. There's not really full details there, but that's what it looks like. And obviously things can change. I'm sure this is evolving. I'm sure this is being tested. This was a big surprise for people. So I imagine this is something they're going to play test a lot, I feel like. Like I really hope that they actually bring in new rules that are thematically aligned, be it morale, be it like you're saying, the monsters actually breaking free, like if we want some sort of psychosis thing, whatever, I don't know. But like, to me, it would be disappointing if they released this and they didn't have some rules specifically for this universe that sort of made it make sense.
Yeah.
And there's detriments and positive stuff about that too, right? Because it's like, the positive thing about that is that it makes it seem more thematically valid, and the bad thing about it is like, oh my god, more rules? Let's we need a Battle Mech manual, Gothic edition or whatever, that's a pain too. But I just feel like, there's some things that you need to really thematically hit on, and maybe those rules are just pertaining to the grafted creatures and they have specific impacts on other units that just they keep it that simple. That's fine. But I want to see it. I want those rules.
Yes. And there's precedence for that. We've a long time had tons of optional rules. I think it would be neat to basically provide some new rule options that you can tack on, take it or leave it, add it to your Gothic game, add it to your non-Gothic game if you want. Basically having some optional rules to turn on or off, I think would be really neat.
Totally. So with all that in mind, what ifs do you have, Michael?
I don't understand the question. What if what?
It's a nebulous question, but I think that what I mean, but okay, ask me the question. Ask me the question. I'll be like,
okay,
let's drop
Nathan,
it.
what ifs do you have?
What if the clans come back? What's that going to be like?
There is sort of mention of them in the backstory. Kerensky still took a bunch of people and they went somewhere. Maybe they'll come back and be completely normal. Maybe they'll just be like literally regular humans, and they'll just be like, what is going on? What did you people do?
Yeah, that would be the twist, right? Because they're already into genetic engineering and all that stuff. They're all about enhancing the stuff. They're already aligned and like build their philosophies around specific animals that they found, totem creatures. In theory, it would go just with grafting even more extreme, like we become the steel viper, they have snakeheads. They could do all that extreme. They could just go way more extreme in the grafting space. Or perhaps they're just complete purists. They're like, no, we're staying with humans. We're genetic engineering just all humans. And that would actually be different enough, right? Like if the clans came back and the clans were just the clans, but more clannish in terms of more into genetic engineering, just from the human perspective, that would actually be different enough for this universe to make it interesting and actually be quite the force. And then I'd also still be like, hell yeah, I'm a clanner for a reason, man. Like it'd be cool. They would almost feel like really elevated humanity. I don't think this is once again a BattleTech continuing game. I think they're only releasing this. So I don't think, once again, this was made for the people that love the Succession Wars and want more ways to play it. So I don't think they're gonna release a clan expansion or anything like that. But that's the what if that's one in my head. Well. What if the clans come back? Oh, what's that gonna be like? So that was one thing when I was reading this. I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah. So with me saying that, does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think I'm really interested in hearing more about these like damned world. There's lots of mention about like, rampant bioviruses and augmenting grafts and things just being unleashed on planets, and whole planets being uninhabitable because they're full of monsters. And then, just now we've been talking about like the periphery states and how like there's sort of a teeming horde at the edge. I'm interested in seeing more about that. I'm curious if we'll get any more sort of lore about that, or if they're mostly going to be sort of, background player. I'm really interested to see more about that, hear more about that.
Yeah. It'd actually be really fun to run a campaign in this where you are, you're the MechWarriors. Your lance is dropped off on a planet. All you're doing is clearing out abominations. That has the Doom feeling. And it also really has the PvE feeling. It'll make you feel special enough, but still have the threat. And then eventually you meet corrupt MechWarriors or whatever. I don't know. There's lots of cool sort of levers that you can pull on as a GM to make it to make the perspective that players really feel engaged and special. And that's one thing that's good about sort of more black and white feeling systems. But I mean, even though we've been talking about black and white, you've mentioned many times how there is diversity still, and there's still those parallels in the different factions. So once again, this is the level of black and white that perhaps BattleTech was at the beginning, appropriately, but I could imagine that even though the universe itself inherently feels darker, that there could be a lot more depth in here than we're alluding to in this conversation, or perhaps I'm alluding to.
Yeah, to me, it feels like, there's maybe not as many different types of stories you could tell in this universe. It naturally lends itself to some specific approaches, and it's going to be at its strongest when you dial up that grimdark, I think. But yeah, battle mechs versus monsters, being on a holy crusade, fighting for the glory of the dragon, telling those specific stories, directed campaigns that have a really strong direction. I feel like that's probably going to be where it's at its strongest. Not a lot of weird political machinations. You're here for the monsters. You're here for the xenophobia. You're here for, people getting murdered. I think that's going to be most of the stories that you want to tell in this. Maybe one day it becomes this whole big, deep, interconnected lore. But for now, I just think it's really going to be for if you got something already kicking around in your head. I know I've got some ideas, I'm already thinking about. I want to run it as an invading periphery force. You're just you're some raiders from a periphery planet. You're all mutated freaks, and you're here to get some comeuppance.
Nice. I think I would definitely go more I'd go for something that felt more like Aliens. You going to a planet and you have a strike force that's cocky and arrogant, and then all of a sudden you realize that you're fighting grafted abominations that are more organized, more intelligent, more prepared than you were expecting, and sort of always being on the back foot with that risk. That's the type of stuff that's where my GMing inclination comes into mind.
You watch the various infantry and vehicles under your command get torn apart. Your resources dwindle mission after mission as you try to survive, knowing that there's more monsters out there than you can kill. Or maybe hitting the slowly dawning realization, you're here to subdue this planet, but the biophage has already been unleashed, and every single living organism on this planet will become a weapon that wants to kill you.
It'd be cool if they made in this universe ballistics better. Because you could imagine that lasers are great and all that, but lasers would sear flesh. So they cauterize the wound. So ballistics would have bleeding properties on grafted creatures. So there'd be if you had any
a
glancing
reason to bring
blows,
autocannons.
a reason to, So finally you could He'd be like, hey, man, I know you guys have been complaining about years. You Succession Wars players have been complaining about BattleTech, and you Ballistics players. Well, now we've released BattleTech Gothic specifically for you, tailored specifically to meet your requirements, so you're welcome. You're welcome. So I want all you players to write Catalyst Game Labs right now a thank you letter, because obviously that's why they did this.
Yeah, they were listening to you.
What are you most excited about for it?
I am excited about quite a few things. I think sort of this is a little specific one for me. I would love to see more tech. I think, they obviously want to leverage existing rules. They're not rolling out a bunch of unique mechs or anything, but I love reading about technology in the BattleTech universe. I'm a big nerd. I like reading about how binary lasers work. So I want just a few pieces of technology that come from BattleTech Gothic. They work for weird ways. They use biotechnology or something. Give me friggin' bio goo guns for my mechs. That's one of the things that I want. How about you? Give me bio goo guns.
I like having kaijus on the board, like rules for kaijus that are sort of official, because like in game modes, you could have, even incorporating normal game modes, random elements. I love random elements. All of a sudden, when you're fighting in the battle, you go by a cave. There's a cave on the map, and you've awakened this beast that was slumbering in its breeding season or whatever, so it becomes hostile to everything invading its territory. I like throwing that in.
And it charges out of the cave, firing LRMs as it goes.
Maybe we'll see how melee oriented. I assume they're melee, but maybe that's a good point. Without weapons on them, maybe that won't exist. But anyhow, like rules for something like that.
And I'm sort of the same. I see it as a little bit like, I would love to run some games with some monsters. I think combined arms are really cool. And this is just, an extra type of arm to combine with. Give me big mechs, tiny infantry, and some in-between monsters.
I think that, I didn't think about it from the tech perspective, but since you mentioned it, I would love to see more melee weapons or something, because like if we're really doubling down on knights, let's get some actual, like, imagine these battle mechs actually like going melee with swords against these grafted mons. I know the grafted mons also have LRMs and stuff like that, so maybe it doesn't make sense, but I'm sure there's some that don't have these weapons. And like that is badass. You want to talk about like a real knight feeling, like you have an Atlas running in with a sword and a shield. That is cool. And we already have those weapons, but maybe something that, like all the weapons in BattleTech, their rules are pertaining really to fighting other mechs.
Yeah, give us chain swords and impact hammers and, giant drills.
Yeah.
And, give us like interesting rules for them instead of just making them like bad versions of one another.
Like we could dig into this more and just make it more fun and interesting, because how cool would it be to have a lance of knights? You 4 mechs that have, basic long-range weaponry, but like shields and swords, and are like holding like a front against monsters, I think.
Give me a monster hunter gun lance. I wanna stab a monster and then explode it with it as a gun.
What's it called? The gun blade in Final Fantasy VIII? Yeah, give us gun blades. Give us everything. Anyhow, like, they've already put a lot of heart into this. One thing so there's been, the reaction to this wasn't that positive, to be honest. From what I saw online, lots of people, their concerns were, oh my God, Catalyst, what are you doing? Focus on the main franchise. Why are you doing this? Why are you going this opposite direction? And here's my opinion. My opinion is that when you are in a creative industry and when you are a creator, you sometimes just got to embrace the juices and let the juices flow. And to me, BattleTech Gothic, the retro sci-fi one, the anime style, this is just like them being like, oh my God, this is so cool. What if we do this? What if we do that? You can just imagine these guys in a room, like getting really excited about this concept, just a bunch of nerds getting excited. And I like to see that is part of BattleTech. Like, I want to see people get excited about things and try new things and really follow their passion, because there's elements like, am I going to become a dedicated BattleTech Gothic player? Probably not. But this is something that I would love to put in and supplement in my game. So I'm really excited to play it on the table when it comes out. If we got a review copy, that would be great. We would totally check it out. So hint, hint, send us a review copy.
Yeah, I think it would be super cool. I think as someone who plays not a huge amount, but a fair amount, it would be fun to run some games. It would be fun to run a short campaign in this. Maybe it'll help appeal to some new people who've normally bounced off the really political stuff and would like something a little bit more familiar to them to play in. I'm curious to see where it goes. And if it just ends up being this one box set, I think that's perfectly cool. One box set with some weird little minis you can collect if you like them.
Totally. And man, if they somehow find a way to connect like the Black Marauder to this universe.
You're obsessed with the Black Marauder.
I'm obsessed with the Black Marauder. I want more Black Marauder stuff, because the last Black Marauder story was talking about like the planes, like at like reality, and us looking at reality differently. Like us looking at reality like this 3D plane, and maybe it's like actually in 60, and the Black Marauder is just like a finger of a creature that has somehow crept into our universe from another dimension, and maybe that's what this is. Oh. Cosmic horror, man. I don't know, bro. I love cosmic horror. I love, H.P. Lovecraft stuff so much. And so, once again, this is not cosmic horror. This is definitely not
it's
cosmic
quite grounded,
horror.
surprisingly.
Yeah. But actually, you know what? Actually, scrap the anime one and do a BattleTech cosmic horror. Do a BattleTech Cthulhu edition. Oh my. I would, seriously. That's a great idea. Give me a BattleTech Cthulhu. I will play anything Cthulhu. Oh my God. I don't even know.
Maybe that's the next massively overambitious BungleTech Co project.
BattleTech Cthulhu. Don't put that idea in my head, Michael. We'll have the skeleton with BattleTech Gothic. We could do it. So yeah, I guess the last question that we had on the list, I think we've already answered it, but is this crazy? Is this crazy, Michael? Do you think this is crazy?
Why are you asking me? This is a you question. Nathan, is this crazy?
Crazy smart. Crazy like a fox.
A bioengineered fox with SRMs?
Yeah, crazy like a grafted fox.
No, I definitely think this is cool. I think that it's neat. I can understand it not being like everyone's cup of tea. But hey, we're in the BattleTech Renaissance. We gotta let's get get it while it's good. Let's try some weird things.
Yeah,
get some weird things out there.
That's it. Let's try some weird things. Let's embrace the creativity of the creators. Let's see where it goes. And I totally have faith that they'll keep on honoring the main line and expanding on that. But fun little things like this, if this is really bringing the creative juices to the team, and there obviously is passion behind this. I wonder who was like the chief mastermind behind this. That would be cool to actually get him on the podcast, or her or them on the podcast, and just get into their mind, because I would love to find out how this sort of spawned into being. Spawn is an appropriate word, or how it was grafted into being. Not built. It wasn't built.
Don't push it too much.
That would be fun. So hey, if you were that person, hit us up.
And you're listening to our podcast.
And you should be, who doesn't listen to BungleTech, a BattleTech podcast? Especially our episode called, what are we going to call this one? I think we should call it, I was initially going to call it Going Goth, but should we call it?
It's actually kind of good.
We could call it finally, Succession Wars players honored. Something just to yeah, we're just playing the Succession Wars again. What do we want? No, we're just joking and stuff like that. We're just joshing, guys. But
yeah, we're just joshing.
It's just joshing, bro. Don't punch me in the face. I'm just joshing. So that makes everything okay. But no, I think it's gonna be fun. I think it's going to be fun. I'm excited to see more. But like I say, the one that really, really vibes with me, that's going to be the retro sci-fi because, like I say, that really just connects to how I visualize the original BattleTech with the, art style and, oh God, the Locust, totally War of the Worlds and the janky looking mechs. Oh my God. If they can somehow, like the old janky BattleTech art, if they could recreate that in the retro sci-fi like expansion, but actually do it with well-printed miniatures, it would just be hilarious to put those janky looking mechs on the table that were printed so well. It would just look awesome. I would laugh all the time, and I would only use those miniatures on the table. I would use my janky looking Jenner and my janky looking like Locust, and people would be like, what is that?
You've got me excited for some of the other Continuum stuff now too, so we'll see.
All right, everybody. Well, I think this has been fun. Thank you for listening to us rant about this. Hopefully it's been interesting. And I know it's a little bit disappointing in comparison to our last episode, which was amazing. But, Michael carries on despite me.
I carry on because of you. Remember, you're grafted into me now. That's part of the lore.
Oh my God. The Kodama in this universe. The Kodama, how we got to this yet? The grafting, the Kodama. The Kodama could be, they would even more deadly and dangerous.
The most terrifying abominations are Kodama swarms.
Oh my God, okay.
Kodamas with S lasers. Kodamas with machine guns.
Okay, BattleTech Gothic creators.
Get the Kodamas in there.
Put the Kodama in here. That is official request from BungleTech, a BattleTech podcast, and all our listeners. I'm sure when I said that, all our listeners were like, yeah, put the Kodama in there. Just trust us. That will sell 8 gazillion copies of this thing. 8 gazillion. Yeah, the Kodama is the future of BattleTech.
This is Professor Michael presenting The Sphere in Decline. One of the more enigmatic of the great realms is the Unistar Ascendancy. They're a profoundly religious people following a body of work known as the Word of Toyama, and believing in the sacred nature of Terra. Born from the ashes of the Terran hegemony, these people trace their history back to the work of Jerome Blake, Conrad Toyama, and Aaron de Chevalier, in pulling together the people of Terra and nearby worlds into a functional society, the United Assembly of Stars. As the endless war ground on, however, the assembly gave way to the Unistar Ascendancy. Toyama's deep spirituality formed the heart of the new realm, and to this day they remain strong not under the rule of a noble family, but a complex corporo theocracy. The machinations of the society are opaque, even to those who live there, but they are a committed and efficient people, more than willing to defend themselves and enforce their interests on nearby worlds. The Unistar Ascendant Guard is feared for their exceptional training and their remnants of hegemony technology. But that too has started to show signs of decay as caches are depleted and factories fall into disrepair. Now you know about the Sphere in Decline.
And that brings us to an end of another deployment of BungleTech. And oh boy, if you weren't craving running out buying some black eyeliner and lipstick, some spike chain wristbands, and a dog collar necklace, you've taken way too many pilot hits. A quick monthly reminder, do us a solid and post a review of our podcast on your podcast platform of choice if you haven't already. I'll even sweeten the deal this month for you. If we get 10 or more new reviews by next month's episode, I'll post a picture of myself in my teenage goth phase. As always, you can find us via Discord, email, Twitter, and now Patreon, all linked in the description. Until next time, MechWarriors, good fortunes on the battlefield. Selah.
All podcast objectives complete. Podcast shutdown sequence initiated.